The Ayaneo Kun is the latest, most advanced handheld ever, from a company that has a fair bit of experience making them. With a spec list including AMD's Ryzen 7840U, a 54-watt max TDP, 8.4-inch IPS display with a higher resolution than most desktop monitors, a 75-watt-hour battery, and controller options rivaled only by the Steam Deck, there's a lot to get excited about here. Of course, those features all have to come together into one cohesive package for that coveted ultimate gaming handheld crown, which is a bit of foreshadowing of what this video is about. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. Handheld gaming PCs, a market once reserved for only the clinically insane, and now it's open to just about every manufacturer under the sun. When Valve released the Steam Deck, it brought gaming handhelds out of the fringes of enthusiast space and into the foreground. It set the standard for what a handheld gaming PC should be, and within a year we saw a near global standardization of features, especially at the top end of things. The specs you want in a gaming handheld are as follows: an AMD Ryzen 7840U or one of its cousins like the Z1. Memory should be LPDDR5 to maximize bandwidth for the APU. A battery that can last for between 2 and 3 hours at full speed while gaming. But there's more to a handheld than just the raw specs, which we'll get into in just a few minutes. Before we get into it, Ayaneo did send out the Kun for my review today, and if I'm being honest, I've had it for almost 4 months, and wasn't initially excited about the review. But after driving it for the last 2 months, I've got some long-term thoughts on it that I think are worth sharing. Like all reviews on the channel, no money changed hands. Ayaneo has no input over the production of this video, nor will they see it before it goes live on YouTube. With that out of the way, this is the Ayaneo Kun, a handheld gaming PC that stretches that definition to its absolute limit, with an 8.4-inch screen and tipping the scales at nearly a full kilogram. That's 300 grams heavier than the Steam Deck, and makes it one of the heaviest handhelds I've ever reviewed on the channel. It has all the hallmarks of a high-performance handheld, like I mentioned just a moment ago. Powered by a Ryzen 7840U, 32GB of LPDDR5, a 2TB Gen 4 NVMe drive, microSD expansion, a massive 75-watt-hour battery, all crammed into a package that, footprint-wise, is actually not all that much larger than the Steam Deck it's trying to upstage. Obviously, the feature that's going to get the most attention is the 8.4-inch IPS display, which features a 2560 by 1600 resolution. And that's where we'll start this review. After over a year on the market, I am very familiar with the 7840U APU, both what it's capable of, and more importantly, what it's not. The problem is, on this 1600p display, 2560 by 1600p looks absolutely amazing, and it should. That's the native resolution. 1920 by 1200 looks very good as well, and so does 1680 by 1050. The one resolution that should be the easiest to display for the controller to scale to is 1280 by 800, but it looks like absolute dog in games. Text is basically unreadable because of all the interpolation. Ironic because it is a perfect 1:4 scale, and there shouldn't be any interpolation artifacts at all. Performance-wise, the 7840U really isn't capable of driving modern games at 2560 by 1600, so you're going to be far more likely to run games at a lower resolution, which makes this beautiful 1600p screen a complete miss in terms of usability. You're not going to use it at its native resolution, so it would have been much preferred to see a 1200p screen, but at 75 or maybe even 90 Hz instead. At least that would have been a realistic target for performance, but we'll dive into that a bit further when we start looking at benchmarks. Next, I want to talk about the controls and ergonomics, which is probably the most important factor when choosing a handheld. While performance is great, if a device is too heavy or uncomfortable, you're going to be hesitant to pick it up or toss it in your backpack so you can use it on an airplane. It's also very subjective, so all I can do is present my opinions here. One of the most important things that Valve did on the Steam Deck, besides set the bar for usable performance in a gaming handheld, was absolutely nail the ergonomics of this device. For quite a long time, the Steam Deck was one of the larger handhelds out there, with nearly 40% of the face being dedicated to controls instead of screen real estate. I don't think it's controversial to say this is not one of the most attractive handhelds on the market. But for me anyway, it meets every point of contact on my hand like a glove. Every button perfectly finds a finger to touch. The weight of the device is sitting on my palms, with my wrists supporting everything at a very comfortable angle. And most importantly, every face button, joystick, and trackpad are easily reachable with my thumb at a moment's notice. The Ayaneo Kun, by contrast, is one of the first handhelds that I can remember that has the same input options as the Steam Deck. There are a pair of joysticks, along with your standard ABXY and an 8-way D-pad on the face, but just below those is a pair of trackpads, which you can use as either a mouse input, a scroll wheel, or to be configured as a press zone button, very similar to how they're used on the Steam Deck. On the top, we've got standard console inputs with a pair of triggers, a pair of shoulder bumpers, and then there are a total of 6 custom buttons, 2 on top and then 4 around the rear, just like you would normally find on the Steam Deck as well. And these can be set as game-specific hotkeys through Ayaneo's IOSpace software. Now, my first impression when taking the Kun out of the box was not great. While the shape of the Kun is absolutely beautiful, blowing the Steam Deck and most other handhelds out of the water based on aesthetics alone, it doesn't lend itself to being the most comfortable device to hold. When gripping the Kun, you need to hold it almost completely vertically. By that I mean your wrist and your arms can't approach from any angle. They need to be parallel to the sides so you can support the device with the palms of your hands. This poses 2 main problems. First, I found my palms constantly touching the trackpads and triggering mouse inputs or movement that would send my game into a tizzy. Have you ever been playing a game on a controller and someone bumps into the mouse, causing your view to just spin around and jerk suddenly to one side? How about random mouse clicks firing your gun, or planting ancient seeds where you didn't want them to go in Stardew Valley? Also, in this grip position, my right thumb is nowhere near the joystick. Moving my thumb down to land in the right place means either lowering my entire grip to a lower point on the controller and making it more difficult to reach the trigger and bumper with my pointer finger over here, or angling my thumb down, making it more uncomfortable and also removing my palm from the side of the device. That shifts the weight from the palm of my hand to a point in between my pointer and middle fingers up here. It's not very comfortable. It puts weight in a much more concentrated spot, making hand fatigue much faster than I would with a more relaxed grip. And that's not even the end of my ergonomic complaints either. While the Steam Deck seemed to place a button to fall very naturally under each one of my fingers, almost none of the buttons on the Kun line up with where I naturally wanted to grip the controller. While the triggers line up just fine, pressing either of the shoulder bumpers require literally trying to lift my finger up and off of the control. It's not a very comfortable or natural motion for your finger to rotate outwards like this. The ABXY buttons and the left joystick are both very natural to reach, but the D-pad and the right joystick take either shifting your grip to land on or holding the controller in an awkward way. There are 2 hotkeys near the top of the display, one serving as the Xbox menu hotkey, and the other, I actually haven't figured out what this other button does yet. It doesn't seem to have any effect in-game or in Windows, nor did I see it listed in IOSpace as a custom key. My assumption was this was supposed to be some sort of options key when Ayaneo was planning on integrating SteamOS onto this handheld, but wound up without official support, and then this button just wasn't implemented. The Xbox button is a nice touch though, as it allows you to use big picture mode inside of Steam and get the SteamOS-like interface, but running inside of Windows. The Xbox button brings up the SteamOS menu while in-game, and is pretty crucial in my opinion to getting the most polished experience possible when launching or switching games. Anyway, my point was that these 2 buttons up here on the top of the display are fairly easy to reach. But Start and Select, or whatever they're called these days, are buried on the bottom left of the device. That is a full 3.5 inches of vertical travel from where your left thumb lands on the joystick to where the menu buttons are at. And I don't know about you, but my thumb is only 2 3/4 inches long to begin with. It's quite a stretch and a complete change in grip to be able to hit that key. And the same thing goes for the Ayaneo hotkeys on the bottom right. The real kicker is that while Ayaneo has 6 programmable buttons and 2 trackpads, those really aren't the keys that I wanted to change around. I'd much rather put the Start and Select buttons up here on either side of the display, and put the Xbox and Options buttons in the bottom left. I also had some issues with the left joystick in general, as it doesn't rotate 100% smoothly. The right stick is very smooth and predictable, and that should be the expectation. But from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, there's a bit of grinding in the perimeter on the left stick. What's even worse is between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock on the bottom side, there's a spot that almost stops the stick from moving entirely. It's got a little bit of a hitch in it when you're trying to move it between those positions. Also, while we're on the subject of making things entirely uncomfortable, all 6 of the custom buttons that I mentioned earlier that you can remap in software are nearly impossible to hit with a normal grip. There's the 2 on the top inside of the shoulder buttons. I don't know what human is going to be able to have fingers that long to reach. Like, it's insane how far in those are from the side of the device. And then there's the 4 buttons on the back, which should line up with your ring and your middle finger, but the way you have to hold this device, it lands like halfway in between my ring and my pinky fingers, because I need to support the device from the bottom somehow, but the curve of the device means gravity's working against me. And I know it feels like I've been ranting on ergonomics and controls and the shortfalls of this device for like 8 minutes now, but there's one more thing that we have to talk about, and it's the trackpads. You know, the trackpads that were supposed to bring complete feature parity to the Steam Deck controller, allowing you to have mouse-accurate movements in game, or the ability to dual-thumb the on-screen keyboard, or the ability to have 8 custom soft keys that you could swap in and out at will depending on the game that you were playing. The trackpads that Valve so carefully and meticulously crafted over a decade of development in the Steam controller and then later the Steam Deck. Those trackpads that Ayaneo needed to implement on the Ayaneo Kun. I hate everything about Ayaneo's trackpads. Look, I've already talked at length about the ergonomic issues here, and the trackpads are at the bottom of the device, so just use your imagination on the contortionism needed to get your thumbs from their natural position all the way up here down to being able to use these trackpads that are also near the edge of the device. I've already talked about them being so sensitive and easy to hit with your palm, so we'll just gloss right over the frustrating issues I had in games with the random inputs and movements being thrown at me while I was playing. No, the real kicker is that I even tried to use the trackpad as just a trackpad, just a mouse. And that was also a complete fail. The pad isn't accurate enough for me to interact with checkboxes or other elements on the screen. I found the touchscreen to be more accurate, which should tell you the level of frustration I had when trying to point and click with the trackpad. I also tried the custom settings for buttons and the 4 directions on the pad, but I found them more frustrating than not to use. I've also verified I have the latest version of ISpace installed, as well as the latest firmware for the trackpads, available from Aya's website. Luckily, the latest firmware does allow you to disable the trackpads entirely, which is ultimately how I left them. As far as why are the trackpads even here, I do have a theory. In late 2023, Ayaneo shocked everyone when they announced that their next spate of devices would be shipping with SteamOS. Most interface complaints around modern handhelds center around the reliance on Windows, as there's no unified software to serve as a game launcher or any accessible settings in the menu for adjusting screen brightness, or device power modes, or control schemes, or anything else that needs to be adjusted on a device like this on the fly. Valve not only solved the ergonomics of handheld PCs, they also solved the usability problem that comes with them being PCs. Ayaneo was planning on using those innovations to deliver a better experience to their users. But as it turns out, Ayaneo wasn't partnering with Valve at all. Rather, they were planning on deploying Holo ISO, a community port of most of SteamOS's features, with some custom tweaks to allow their hardware to work seamlessly. Unfortunately, back in January, Ayaneo decided to scrap those plans entirely and ship all future devices with Windows. And what we're left with is a device that has trackpads and an option button that have no real software implementation, and probably should have been removed altogether rather than letting them hang around and bring down the entire user experience. Alright, I promise, no more ergonomics, no more controllers. Let's go ahead and move on to the internals. One of the selling points Ayaneo is hoping will catch your attention is the modified power limit of the Ryzen 7840U. Official specs from AMD list the chip as having a configurable power limit from 15 to 28 watts. I've seen a few also push that limit up to 35 watts, like the 1X Fly handheld I reviewed not long ago, or my 6800U power GPD WinMax 2. But, as all gamers know, more power equals more frames, right? That's why the Ayaneo Kun is able to crank the power limit all the way up to 54 watts, letting the APU max out its performance as far as possible. Now, I'm not saying there's no benefit from raising the power limit from 28 or 30 to 54 watts, but the problem is It's not a paradigm shift. You're not going to make the leap to a higher tier of graphics cards simply by doubling the power that you crank through a chip. An overclocked RTX 4070 will never, under no uncertain words, ever overtake a 4070 Ti. And in the mobile game, with fewer compute units and tighter packaging, that's even more true. The 7840U, as I've been alluding to, has been the singular solution to high-end mobile gaming and handhelds because it's simply good enough in most cases. It's able to play games at 1080p, at low to medium settings, and at a frame rate that's good enough. And while it is good enough, it also has some serious limitations with anything beyond those expectations. I ran the Ayaneo Kun through the standard 3D Mark test suite just to verify it performed within the specs of a 7840U at 28 watts. And I'm happy to say that, yes indeed, this passed with flying colors and performs like a 7840U, even beating out the 1X Fly by 1 or 2%. But cranking the TDP from 28 all the way up to 54 watts and running those same tests again on USB power, by the way, saw about a 6 to 8% improvement on average. 6 to 8% for double the power draw. But what does that actually mean for games, for your experience if you were to buy this device and play on it? Rather than my normal benchmarks, I wanted to show just a couple of games to demonstrate what I'm talking about here. The 7840U is a very solid performer at 1080p, but the Kun doesn't have a 1080p display. Again, they opted for a 2560 by 1600 monster, and the handheld is woefully underpowered to make it all work together. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands at 1600p, low settings, and with the system set to 28 watts, we get an average of 37 frames per second with a low of 19. Decent results, but definitely some choppiness that, when combined with twitch aiming on a joystick, made for a less than perfect experience. But surely the answer to overcoming those limitations is to simply double the amount of power that the 7840U can consume, right? If you double the power, you can double your frame rate. Well, at 54 watts, we see an improvement of 3.8%. Power use at the 28 watt TDP saw exactly that, roughly 28 watts being used as read through ISpace's overlay. When we set the TDP to 54 watts, we saw system power climb to between 45 and 48 watts most of the time while in game. That's a 71% increase in power use for a 4% boost in game performance. I don't know about you, but my perception isn't keen enough to spot the difference between 36 and 38 frames per second on average. But I feel I would definitely notice my battery life dropping by more than half. Do you know what actually made a difference in playability though? Dropping the resolution from 2560 by 1600 to 1920 by 1200. At the same low settings and 28 watt TDP, we see an average of 56 frames per second and a low of only 29. The low frame rates are within spitting distance of the average frame rate from the 1600p test, which should tell you how much smoother this was at a lower resolution. For the second game, people have been diving back into Fallout 4, so I figured I would give that a look here as well. While not quite as dramatic, the results are very similar to what we saw in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. At 1600p, high settings, and 28 watt TDP, we do get an average of 52 frames per second with a low of 26. Bumping up the TDP to 54 watts sees a very slight improvement in the average frame rates to 53 frames per second, but slightly worse 1% and 0.1% lows, dropping down to 24 frames per second. Again, not an awful experience, but definitely jittery at times, even with the combat being a bit slower paced in this title. Dropping the resolution to 1200p, and again running at just 28 watts, we see a solid 60 frames per second on average, but the lows again improve dramatically, up to 38 and 34 frames per second in the 1% and 0.1% low respectively. One thing to note here as well is I was using the GOG version of Fallout 4, which does not include the 4K texture pack by default. On Steam, if you install Fallout 4, you get the 4K textures whether you want them or not, which further tanks the playability of this game on mobile devices without either removing or disabling that add-on later on. The GOG install is also just 38 gigabytes versus nearly 100 gigabytes if installed through Steam. So, there's a lot to digest from this review, and a couple things that I've been flirting around without coming straight out and saying them. I think the Ayaneo Kun is one of the most egregious examples of feature creep that I've ever seen make it to a retail product. Feature creep is setting a goal for what your project should look like. In this case, Ayaneo wanted to build a premium handheld gaming PC, and then listing every single feature from all of your competitors and making sure you beat all of their specs, whether on paper or with better hardware, and making sure you have more features and more specs than you can possibly list than them. At 8.4 inches, this is one of the largest handheld screens you can buy. At 2560 by 1600, it's the highest resolution screen you can get in a handheld form factor. The 7840U is the de facto choice of current mobile parts, and at 54 watts, should outperform all comers. There's a 75 watt-hour battery, which is among the largest on the market. There are input options exceeding every other console that's out there right now, even including the Steam Deck with its dual trackpads and all of its macro keys. There's also a host of little things that are really too much to list in this review. There's a Windows Hello Facecam and a fingerprint reader built into the power button for quick login options in Windows. There's a kickstand, there's a micro SD card slot, there's 2 full-featured USB 4 ports, amazing quality audio from the downward-facing speakers, and it all comes in a box that's made from freaking white oak. But when you strip all that away, you're left with a handheld gaming PC that is heavier, more expensive, and only a couple percentage points faster than every other handheld on the market right now. The Kun, equipped with the 2TB Gen 4 NVMe drive and 32 gigs of LPDDR5, is nearly $1,400. $1,400, all for a handheld that really isn't comfortable to hold, has a litany of issues with configuration and accuracy of its controllers, and when I powered mine on for the first time, I was met with a gnarly grinding sound out of the fan. As it turns out, someone dropped this, which is a screw and a threaded insert into the fan during assembly. I get that mistakes happen. Every company has some mistakes that crop up during manufacturing. But needing to disassemble the PC and remove this screw from the fan blades when I first powered it on does take some of that premium shine off the product that shipped in a oak box. Maybe they should have used CNC Kitchens inserts. I don't think those would have come out. Look, if the Kun had launched in 2022 with very few competitors on the market, it would have been a grand slam. And at $1,400, that's what premium handhelds were selling for just a few short years ago. But when the ROG Ally has a 120Hz screen and a 7840U for $699, the Lenovo Legion has a 144Hz screen and is $625 as of the time of filming. The One X Fly has a 120Hz screen and is going for $899. Well, big display or not, it's not a very compelling offer. And those other consoles have far more comfortable control schemes to boot, meaning you're likely going to spend more time playing those than you would if you bought this. This is a valiant effort. This looks like a premium handheld. But feature and spec creep, I think, made Ayaneo lose sight of what it was they were actually trying to build. A premium gaming handheld in 2024 isn't necessarily just about performance anymore, as every premium handheld is now using the exact same APU. The other features on the device have to be perfect, and the Ayaneo Kun falls well short of that mark. Plus, it's still $1,400. You can buy 2 7840U powered handhelds for that price today. In fact, when I was looking up the ROG Ally, they're on Amazon right now for $399 while I'm filming this. So 3 120Hz 1080p 7840U powered handhelds, or 1 Ayaneo Kun. If you're interested in any of the hardware that I mentioned in today's video, I will have links for them all down in the video description. Those are affiliate links, and I sometimes get a small commission from any purchases made there, which do help keep the lights on around here. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is down in the video description and gets you exclusive access to my Discord server. That's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, everyone. Beverage for today is from Otto Ciders. This is a non-alcoholic sparkling CBD cider. This is their Passion Pineapple. It's one of my favorite drinks to get on a fairly regular basis. Oh, and a little bit of spiced rum goes a long way in this. So this is a cider I get quite regularly. It's delicious, it's refreshing, it's crisp. Otto makes all their ciders gluten-free. My wife has celiac disease. We're a primarily gluten-free household. I have a little shelf that's just mine, but all of our dishes and pans and everything else, those are all usually specified gluten-free. But one thing I like about this is they add just a little bit of hops to their cider. Every single one of their ciders has just a little bit of hops. The pineapple's freaking delicious. They have a hopped apple that is literally like an apple pale ale, and it's delicious. It's non-alcoholic, so you can drink it whenever. They are kind of expensive. They're like $3.50 for a little stubby brown bottle like this. These are 12 ounces. Only 120 calories, but just a darn good drink. I really like these.